Hello, my name is Sloane Bennett. I'm 34 years old and work as a clinical psychologist in London. From the outside, my life once looked like a perfect picture. A flourishing career, a cozy little flat in Notting Hill, and a family I truly believed loved each other. I had built my days on routine, stability, and the quiet comfort that comes from thinking you know who you are and where you come from. But everything changed at my younger sister's wedding. It was a grand celebration, beautifully lit, meticulously planned, filled with the kind of joy people like to photograph and post online. Elise, my sister, looked radiant in her lace-trimmed gown. The guests were laughing, the music soft and elegant, and champagne glasses clinked in toasts all around. Then one glass shattered. And with it, so did the version of my life I had always known. A single comment from my mother, quiet, almost accidental, was all it took to unravel years of certainty. Just a few words, spoken under her breath but loud enough to reach me, changed everything. In that moment, standing in a room full of flowers and silk and polished smiles, my world collapsed in silence. This is the story of what happened next, of betrayal, revelation, and the long road I walked to uncover a truth buried beneath decades of silence. If you've ever been hurt by the people closest to you, maybe you'll find something in this story that speaks to your heart. If you're still listening, we want to sincerely thank you for spending your time with us. Truly means a lot. We'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments and let's see how far this message has reached. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, I highly recommend doing it now so you won't miss any of our upcoming stories. These aren't just ordinary stories, they're filled with meaningful life lessons that can inspire, teach, and stay with you long after the video ends. Hit that subscribe button and join our growing community. Let me begin with that fateful night. Part 1. Under the Chandelier. Elise's wedding was held at a centuries-old castle nestled in the Cotswolds, where glittering chandeliers cast a soft, golden glow over the weathered stone walls. I stood there in my teal silk dress, smiling at the guests, doing my best to conceal that familiar sense of disconnection. Elise, at 28, had always been the family's center of attention, beautiful, captivating, and seemingly born to shine. I, in contrast, was the older sister, calm, steady, always working hard, rarely noticed. Throughout our lives, Elise drew admiration effortlessly, while I built my path through structure and silence. That night, I tried not to let the feeling return, that quiet ache of being invisible in a room full of people. I nodded politely, accepted compliments, and listened to toasts I barely registered. Then came our mother's speech. Vivian, elegant in her burgundy gown, raised her champagne flute and began with affectionate words about Elise, her charm, her brilliance, how proud she made the family. I expected the usual platitudes, the flowery stories rehearsed for weddings. But then she turned to look at me. Her eyes were cold, steady, and she said something no one expected. I must confess that Elise has been secretly sabotaging Sloane's career and relationships for years. Crystal flute in my hand slipped through my fingers. It shattered against the marble floor, the sound piercing the air like a scream. For a moment, no one moved. Conversations halted mid-sentence. Laughter stopped. The room fell into a sharp, stunned silence. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me, toward Elise, toward Vivian. Elise's face went pale. She tried to smile, but her expression cracked under the weight of panic and guilt. And in her eyes, wide, glassy, frantic, I saw the truth. There was no denial, no confusion. Just fear. I couldn't breathe. I walked out without a word. My heels clicked against the stone hallway, echoing behind me. Inside, the night air was cool and still. I wandered until I reached the rose garden behind the castle. Alone, I sat on a cold stone bench, trying to steady my thoughts. The scent of blooming roses hung in the air, but I couldn't feel anything except a hollow pain expanding in my chest. Elise, the sister who once braided my hair, who used to sneak into my bed when thunderstorms frightened her, who laughed with me by the Thames and whispered her secrets in the dark, was the same person who had been quietly orchestrating my downfalls. my failed job interviews, the friendships that faded without warning, the man who broke things off without a reason. All those moments that never made sense, now they formed a pattern. Cruel, intentional one. But how? Why? What could I have done to deserve this from her? Before I take you through what I uncovered, the pieces I slowly fit together in the days that followed, I'd like to know, where are you watching from? Have you ever had someone you love hurt you in a way that stole your breath? If so, you're not alone. Leave a comment below. I'm listening. Part 2: Darkness Beneath the Lights. I grew up in a small village near Oxford, where the Bennets were a source of pride for the community. My father, Arthur, was a respected history professor, and my mother, Vivian, a renowned concert pianist. From early on, Elise was the family's shining star. She began ballet at the age of 5, won school competitions, and was endlessly praised by our mother. Elise was dazzling, graceful, and adored. Sloane was different, quiet, studious, focused. I earned a scholarship to study psychology at the University of Cambridge, driven by hard work and quiet determination. But no matter what I achieved, my accomplishments always felt like a backdrop to Elise's brilliance. "Sloane, why can't you be more energetic like your sister?" my mother would ask while I sat hunched over textbooks instead of going out. "Elise does so well without even trying. You could learn something from her." Those words, seemingly harmless, lodged deep inside me. They repeated themselves in my head long after they were spoken. When I was accepted into a doctoral program, my parents hosted a modest dinner at home to celebrate. But when Elise landed her first job at a London advertising firm, they rented an upscale restaurant and invited everyone they knew. Contrast was never addressed, just quietly felt. A year before the wedding, my life began to unravel in strange and inexplicable ways. A major research contract I had secured at the hospital was suddenly revoked. The reason: an anonymous letter accusing me of professional misconduct. The allegations were baseless, but the damage was done. Around the same time, my boyfriend Julian ended our relationship abruptly. "I just don't think we're right for each other," he said vaguely, refusing to elaborate. Came out of nowhere, and I was left trying to piece together what I had missed. Then, my Notting Hill flat flooded during a pipe burst, destroying several of my research journals and irreplaceable patient notes. Felt like bad luck piling on top of itself, one hit after another, too close together to ignore. But each time I staggered, Elise was there, always kind and supportive. "You deserve better, Sloane," she'd say, wrapping an arm around me. Or, "Julian never saw how amazing you are." Forget him. She was gentle, encouraging, almost saint-like in her care. And I believed her. I had no reason not to. Until the night of the wedding. That night, as her expression crumbled under my mother's words, guilt flickering behind her forced smile, I saw the truth. Not just in the present, but stretching backward into all the cracks in my life. The timing, the coincidences, the mysterious unraveling, they no longer looked random. They looked planned. Part 3: The Overlooked Signs. I began to notice strange things during the preparations for Elise's wedding to Hugo Laurent, a wealthy real estate businessman. There were moments, fleeting, out of place, that didn't make sense at the time, but later echoed with new meaning. Once, during their engagement party at Hugo's estate, I wandered into the library looking for some quiet. That's when I heard Elise speaking in a low voice on the phone. "No, she doesn't suspect anything," she whispered. "Just stick to the plan." The words hit me like a cold breeze. When I stepped into view, she jumped and quickly ended the call. Then, with a wide smile, she said she'd been arguing with the wedding cake designer. Her tone was light, but her eyes were sharp, scanning my face for any trace of suspicion. I brushed it off at the time, telling myself I was being paranoid. Weddings were stressful. People snapped at bakers. A week before the wedding, I was helping Elise try on her dress at the boutique. While waiting outside the fitting room, I again overheard her voice, calm, calculating, just beyond the door. "She'll be there, but it doesn't matter. Mum agrees with everything." I knocked, and she emerged a few seconds later, her expression bright and unbothered. "Just wedding stress," she said when I asked. "You know how it is." And again, I convinced myself to let it go. Maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe a part of me, tired, overshadowed, wanted to see betrayal where there was none. I blamed myself for feeling jealous, even if I never spoke it aloud. But not everyone was so easily convinced. My grandmother, Beatrice, had always been the most perceptive person I knew. At 80, she still lived independently in Bath, her mind sharp, her presence commanding. During a family dinner the week before the wedding, she leaned toward me across the table, her eyes steady behind thin spectacles. "Sloane," she asked quietly, "do you truly believe Elise is good to you?" I blinked, surprised. "Of course," I said. "She's my sister. She's always been wonderful." Beatrice tilted her head slightly, unconvinced. "I've seen the way she looks at you," she said. "Like she wants to take something that belongs to you." Her words unsettled me. I laughed it off then, gently, as a misunderstanding. Elise had always been the golden child, yes, but she was also my sister, the girl I trusted most. Still, my grandmother's words planted something small and uneasy inside me, a seed of doubt I couldn't entirely shake. Later, I'd realized those were the moments I should have paid closer attention to. But at the time, I still wanted to believe Elise loved me. That whatever tension existed between us came from old sibling rivalry, not malice. I didn't yet understand how long this betrayal had been growing or how deep it would go. Part 4, the fateful night. Elise's wedding day was picture perfect. The June sun bathed the rose garden in soft golden light, and the castle grounds looked like something out of a fairy tale. Elise was radiant in her wedding gown, elegant, glowing, exactly as everyone expected her to be. I spent the morning moving constantly, doing whatever was needed, bringing coffee, organizing bridesmaid accessories, adjusting someone's necklace quietly in the background. I wasn't the maid of honor, of course. That role belonged to Clara, Elise's longtime best friend. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was here to support my sister, not to seek attention. But a part of me couldn't help but feel the sting of being passed over once again. Till I kept my focus. I smiled through the ache. I helped with last-minute chaos. I tried to be the kind of sister Elise could count on. Then, in a quiet moment before the ceremony, Elise pulled me aside. She took my hands gently and looked into my eyes. "You've always been the most wonderful sister, Sloane," she said softly. "I wouldn't be who I am today without you." Her words touched me, but there was something in her expression, something unreadable behind her polished calm. A flicker of guilt, or perhaps a silent warning. I couldn't name it then, but it lingered in the back of my mind like a shadow. Later, at the reception, the cracks began to show. Julian, my ex-boyfriend, was there. I hadn't seen him since the sudden breakup. He wasn't connected to Hugo, so his presence made no sense. When I asked Elise, she said breezily that she thought it would be nice for closure. But it wasn't just his presence, it was how Elise interacted with him. Her laugh lingered too long. Her hand brushed his arm. There was an ease between them that made my skin crawl. I felt cold. I wanted to leave. But then came the moment that would change everything. Our mother, Vivian, stood to give her speech. She spoke of Elise's brilliance, her determination, how proud the family was. It was typical, glowing, and polished until it wasn't. With her champagne glass raised, Vivian turned to me and said clearly, "I must confess something. Elise has been sabotaging Sloane's life for years. She sent the anonymous letter that cost her the hospital contract. She interfered with her relationship with Julian. It's time the truth came out." The room froze. Chairs stilled. Conversations halted. All eyes shifted toward our table. I felt the blood drain from my face. Elise stared at our mother, her smile cracking, her hands trembling slightly. Julian looked lost. The orchestra played on, unaware of the storm that had broken. I couldn't breathe. Without a word, I stood and walked out. Castle's marble halls blurred around me. My world had tipped on its axis, and nothing felt solid anymore. Part 5: The Journey for Truth. After the wedding, I moved in temporarily with my grandmother Beatrice in Bath. I needed distance from everything, from Elise, from my parents, from the shock that had left my life in pieces. Beatrice welcomed me with her usual calm, offering space and silence when I needed it most. She told me the wedding descended into chaos after I left. Elise had tried to regain control of the situation by claiming that our mother was mentally unstable. She told guests that Vivian had a history of delusions, that the speech had been a breakdown, not a confession. Hugo, apparently unbothered, still took her on their planned honeymoon. But I knew the truth. My mother had no history of instability. And I could see it in her eyes that night. She had spoken with clarity and purpose. I decided to investigate. Surprisingly, help came from Clara, Elise's best friend and maid of honor. Clara had long harbored doubts about Elise's actions, and after the wedding, her loyalty began to waver. Quietly, she reached out to me. Clara shared access to a secret email account Elise had used. Contained messages she'd sent to one of my colleagues at the hospital, fabricating concerns about my professional competence. These weren't vague complaints, they were specific, deliberate lies meant to discredit me and damage my reputation. There were also texts between Elise and Julian, revealing how she had subtly planted doubts in his mind, nudging him to question my honesty and emotional availability. Then there was the plumbing. I discovered an invoice for plumbing repairs at Elise's flat, dated the same day my Notting Hill apartment flooded. According to the records, Elise had called in the service to inspect for potential leaks in her unit. The plumber's visit just happened to coincide with a pipe burst in mine. Coincidence was too convenient. And it didn't stop there. While combing through old financial records, I found statements from a joint university account Elise and I had shared years ago. I hadn't touched that account in ages, but she had. She'd quietly withdrawn thousands of pounds over time, with no explanation and no intention of returning it. The web she had spun was wider than I thought. I decided to speak with Julian. We met in a quiet cafe near Kensington Gardens. He looked uneasy, almost ashamed. When I asked if Elise had influenced our breakup, he didn't hesitate. "She made me feel like you didn't really care about me," he said quietly. "She was always there, talking about your work, your stress, how you never had time." I started believing it. His voice shook a little. "She never said you were cheating, but she made me feel like something was off. Like I couldn't trust what I felt." That's when it all became clear. This wasn't about isolated incidents. It wasn't jealousy or rivalry. It was a calculated pattern, an orchestrated campaign to undermine my life, bit by bit. And it had gone on for years. Part 6: The Family Secret. A quiet conversation with Beatrice unearthed something far deeper than I had expected. Sitting in her sun-drenched kitchen over chamomile tea, she hesitated, then looked at me with a softness that only decades of wisdom could give. "Your mother wasn't always like this," she began. "She once had a sister, Margot." I blinked. I had never heard the name before. Beatrice explained that Vivian and Margot had been close once, but their bond shattered long before I was born. Margot was a gifted painter, sensitive and full of light. Vivian, though accomplished, often lived in her sister's shadow. And when both women fell in love with the same man, my father, Arthur, it turned bitter. Vivian won him in the end, but only after convincing their parents that Margot was unstable and manipulative. Margot was cut off from the family. "She vanished," Beatrice said. "No letters. No visits. Your mother made sure of it. I sat there, stunned. Parallels between that story and my own were undeniable. Two sisters, one cast in light, the other buried beneath it. Elise and I were living the same rivalry, only dressed in different years. Later that night, I went up to the attic, needing time alone. Dust clung to my sleeves as I rummaged through old family tapes stacked in cardboard boxes. I found a Christmas recording from when I was 10. In the grainy footage, I tore the wrapping from a science experiment kit, my eyes wide with joy. But barely a moment passed before the camera swerved. "Look at Elise in her new dress," my mother's voice chirped. Everyone turned to her, and I sat in the corner, toy in hand, forgotten. Watching those tapes was like solving a puzzle backward. Every piece fell into place: why Elise always needed to be the center of attention, why my mother seemed so invested in that narrative. I arranged to meet my father, Arthur, in a quiet cafe in Oxford. He looked older than I remembered, grayer, more tired. When I brought up what I'd learned, he didn't deny it. He stirred his coffee slowly, then sighed. "I always knew Elise wasn't mine," he said. "She was the result of a short affair your mother had. It nearly ended our marriage, but we decided to raise her as our own. I thought we could keep the family together." "But Mom favored her," I said quietly. "She did," he admitted. Maybe out of guilt, maybe to prove something to herself. I was wrong to let it go this far. There was regret in his voice, a weight of years he hadn't shared with anyone until now. Part 7, the Christmas confrontation. I decided the truth had to come out. That year's Christmas party was held at the Lauron family's countryside estate in the Cotswolds, an opulent celebration of candlelight, holly wreaths, and champagne. The house overflowed with laughter, music, and polished appearances. But I had come with a different purpose. With the help of Eleanor, Hugo's grandmother, a shrewd woman with no tolerance for deception, I prepared everything. Presentation, the documents, the audio recording. I waited until dessert was being served and then stood, heart pounding, and asked for everyone's attention. "I know this is an unusual request," I began, "but there are truths that need to be addressed tonight." The room quieted. I connected my laptop to the large screen in the dining room and began the presentation. First, the emails, Elise's anonymous messages to my hospital questioning my professionalism. Then the screenshots, her text to Julian, laced with subtle suggestions that I was emotionally distant, unfaithful. The invoice from the plumbing company. The withdrawals from our shared university account. One by one, the evidence laid itself bare before the room. Gasps filled the silence. Elise's face turned pale. "That's not what it looks like," she said, standing abruptly. "This is jealousy. This is obsession." But I wasn't done. Finally, I played the audio. A recording from a week after the wedding, secretly captured when I had left a voice recorder in my parents' study during one of Elise's visits. Her voice filled the room. "Of course I sent the letter. Sloane always thought she was smarter, better. I just helped remind people she's not." She laughed. "And the Julian thing? Please. He was easy. She was never enough for him anyway." Then came the part that stunned everyone. "She still doesn't know Dad's not even my father. Mom always covers for me. She'll do it again." The room froze. Hugo stood slowly, staring at Elise with disbelief. "You lied to everyone," he said, voice low and calm. "Even me." "Hugo, she reached out. He stepped back, removed his wedding ring, and set it quietly on the table. "I want a divorce," he said. "Now." Vivian shot up from her seat. "She didn't mean it. It was stress. People say things they don't." But before she could finish, Arthur finally spoke, his voice sharp and clear. "Vivian, enough." It was the first time I had heard him raise his voice. He looked at her, then at Elise. We've all been silent too long. The room remained still. And for the first time, I felt seen, not as the quiet, forgotten sister, but as the woman who uncovered the truth, no matter how painful it was. Part 8: The Recovery Journey. 6 months later, I had begun to rebuild my life, slowly but intentionally. The hospital reinstated me with full honors. I was promoted to lead the psychological research unit, and my reputation was restored after the truth about the false accusations came to light. Felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. I purchased a small house in Bath, not far from Beatrice. It had a quiet garden with lavender bushes and a worn stone path. It was modest, peaceful mine. I also began seeing someone, Oliver, a fellow psychologist I had worked with for years. He had stood by me during the chaos, offering quiet support and gentle presence. There was no grand romantic gesture, just understanding and steadiness. That was enough. Elise moved to Edinburgh. According to her messages, she had started therapy and had been diagnosed with traits consistent with narcissistic personality disorder. She sent a carefully worded email, an apology of sorts, admitting that she may have caused harm, though not fully grasping its depth. We began to exchange emails occasionally, but I maintained firm boundaries. I told her that true healing required accountability. It wasn't forgiveness on demand, it was a process. My parents were now in the process of separating. My father had chosen honesty. My mother, at last, was confronting her role in perpetuating a toxic dynamic, one rooted in guilt, denial, and favoritism. It was painful for everyone, but necessary. One warm summer evening, I hosted a small dinner at my new home. Beatrice sat at the head of the table, sipping wine with quiet satisfaction. Clara laughed beside Oliver, and a few close friends joined us under the string lights. The scent of rosemary and grilled vegetables filled the air. As the night deepened, I raised my glass and said softly, "To those who choose love and truth, even when it hurts." In that moment, I knew I had broken the cycle of betrayal, manipulation, and silence. Conclusion and life lessons. My journey has been filled with pain, but also clarity. And along the way, I've learned a few truths that I want to share just in case someone out there needs to hear them. 1. Blood doesn't define loyalty. We grow up believing that family is everything, that those who share our blood will always protect us. But the truth is, loyalty is a choice, not an obligation. People who stand beside you in truth, who respect your boundaries, and who uplift your growth, those are your real family, even if they aren't related by blood. It's okay to distance yourself from relatives who cause harm, and it's not your duty to carry the weight of toxic family dynamics just because they're family. 2. Manipulation hides in silence. So many families keep secrets. Things go unsaid. Wounds are brushed under the rug in the name of peace. But silence enables harm. When we avoid confrontation to keep others comfortable, we betray ourselves. Speaking the truth can feel like breaking something sacred, but often it's the only way to truly protect yourself and others. Don't let the fear of discomfort keep you silent. Your truth matters. 3. Trust your gut always. Those quiet feelings of unease? They're not paranoia. They're signals. We often rationalize red flags because we want to believe the best in people, especially family. But intuition is our internal compass, honed by experience and emotion. Don't dismiss it. The earlier you acknowledge those subtle alarms, the sooner you can act before the damage deepens. For forgiveness requires accountability and boundaries. Healing doesn't mean forgetting. Doesn't mean opening the door to someone who hasn't taken responsibility. Forgiveness can be peaceful and private, it doesn't require reconciliation. Setting boundaries is not cold or cruel. It's how you protect the healed parts of yourself from being harmed again. 5. The truth will hurt, but it's the path to freedom. Facing betrayal, especially from those you love, is agonizing. But truth, no matter how painful, is a foundation you can rebuild your life on. Lies confuse. Secrets corrode. But the truth, even if it breaks your heart, gives you clarity. And from clarity comes power, purpose, and peace. If this story touched something inside you, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me continue telling real, healing stories. Have you ever experienced betrayal from someone in your own family? If you're comfortable, share your story in the comments. You never know, your words might help someone else feel a little less alone. Thank you for listening. And remember, the truth, however painful, is always the first step toward healing. Until next time.